Hello, this is KP. In this video, you're gonna learn how to answer the easy kind of general paper questions. Now, in the previous video, we talked about the different kinds of questions. There were 3 tiers of questions. If you haven't seen that video, please, go on down to the link below, or I'm gonna put up a card somewhere here. Just watch the first video to see the different kinds of questions, because this video is a continuation of that. We're gonna dive into the first kind of questions. We call them the tier 1 questions. Okay, I named it the tier 1 questions because they are easier than the others. There are in total 3 tiers of questions, by the way. So tier 1 questions, these ones right here, the always, never, ever questions. To what extent? The should question, the to question, double-barreled question. Okay, let's have a look at the very first kind of question. Now, how we're gonna do this is I'm gonna give you. You can pause the video at any point in time to have a read of these questions. So these questions right here they are the always, never, ever questions. Some of you call them the absolute questions. Absolute, because they are asking a question that, if you take a particular stand, that stand will be kind of extreme. So to answer this sort of questions, okay, maybe we just look at this one right here. Should medical science always seek to prolong life? What you're gonna do is to take the more moderate stand and say, no, it is not always true. Medical science should not always seek to prolong life. So the 2 stands you can take is always or not always. So the recommended thing to do is, of course, to always take the moderate stand. What we're gonna do is to have, minimally, this. I'm gonna touch on a little bit of right here, a little bit of how to write the paragraph. So you have minimally 3 body paragraphs. You have the opposing view right here, which is like not your view. Critics argue, blah blah blah, and then what you argue. So this is what the critics or whoever your opponents argue. This is I argue. Now your supporting view would generally be about the not always stand. So you're gonna look at exceptions to prolonging life. So let's talk about the SV first. What are the reasons for not prolonging life? Maybe medical science should not always be about prolonging life. It should be about, say, the quality of life. Not just living longer, but living a better life, even though it might be a little bit shorter. You could also talk about the limited resources, because you may have limited resources. You don't want to divert these resources from other equally important things in just prolonging life, helping people live as long as possible. So, resources for other important things. So we've got 2 reasons why we should not just look at prolonging life using medical science. Then what about your OV? Okay, so that's pretty straightforward, right? This is typically where students will struggle, because they would not have enough points to talk about, like, the exceptions to the rule. And your OV then would talk about why it should be notice the word should here. It should seek to prolong life. Okay, it should seek to prolong life. Prolong life, maybe because it is the duty of scientists and doctors to help patients. So in this case, some people will be tempted. Here's the important part. You may be tempted to add in the word always in your topic sentence. Should always seek to prolong life. Now you can agree to this point. You can agree to that. But if you agree to that and then you say, but not always true, it kind of results in a contradiction between these 2 things. So I typically recommend you remove the word always. Okay. You just say, some people argue, we should seek to prolong life, but I agree to that. And then in the subsequent paragraph, you say, yeah, but that's kind of extreme a view if you say we should always do so. I don't think it's always true. These are the exceptions when it is not true. So that's how you answer the first kind of question, the always, never, ever question. Now, moving on to the second kind of question, the to what extent, how far question. These questions are very common. Sometimes you don't even have to pay attention to the words to what extent, because they if you have seen in the previous video, they come up so often. So this question type, to what extent, there are two ways of answering. They're actually very easy. You can, number one, ignore this. To what extent is human life in general about the survival of the fittest? I can practically ignore it, yeah. Okay, or you can answer, let me write it down here. You can answer, maybe we look at this question instead. To what extent is it possible to make the punishment fit the crime? I can either ignore it, or number two, I can replace the word to what extent with the word when. When is it possible to make the punishment fit the crime? So in this instance, you will angle your arguments a little differently. You start to look at, what kind of crimes, what kind of circumstances would it be possible to make the punishment fit the crime. Now, when you start thinking of the when and when is it not possible, you have a different way of addressing the question. You start to think about, what if the crime is a crime against humanity? Maybe a person kills 100 other people. How are you gonna make the punishment fit the crime? Even if you sentence that criminal to death, okay, you can't take 100 lives from the same person. So maybe in in terms of crimes against humanity, so you can't really make the punishment fit the crime. Or maybe when when the person is too old, it's just impossible to do so. How do you sentence a person who's 80 years old to another 30 years in prison? Okay, unless they live up to 110. Okay, so when you look at the when, okay, it will give you a slightly different answer. So whichever way you look at it is fine. Okay, the third way, of course, is to use a combination of these. So to what extent questions, pretty simple. The next one is the should, desirable, justified, acceptable kind of question. When you see this sort of questions, they are very easy. You can just go ahead and do them because they are really looking at the positive and negative aspect of whatever that's in discussion. Can the use of animals for scientific research be justified? We're asking whether it is good or it is bad to use animals for scientific research. But sometimes just thinking of good and bad is quite narrow. So a stronger student will look into different things like these. Okay, is it relevant? Is it beneficial? Is it necessary? These three things will kind of tell you like different ways of being positive or negative. So you can look at, say, using animals for scientific research. Maybe it's irrelevant nowadays because we have a greater ethical standards today. People are not so keen on testing on animals because ethics have changed over time. In the past, it was perfectly fine. Now, no longer. So we're comparing like different timelines. Then you have the beneficial. That's pretty straightforward. Is it beneficial? Is it harmful to use animals? If you are looking at the necessary component, you are looking at whether there are other alternatives to that. So using animals for scientific research can now be replaced. I mean, there are other options available. You can look at using stem cells, using computer modeling. So there are alternatives to that. Do we have to use animals for scientific research? Do we really have to use those? So if you look at these three things, it might give you slightly different ideas. So that's good for your brainstorming actually. So the should questions, that's all pretty straightforward. Just do it. The to question is very, very, I'm gonna say similar to the should questions. Maybe let's look at this one here. Does modern society place too high a premium on speed? The word too, how high is too high? Generally, okay, we can look at like, not enough, okay, like too little, enough, a lot, and too much. So what they're really asking you is, we know it is a lot, okay, but is it a lot but not too much, or a lot and too much? So you're really asking yourself, right? What is the like, where are we right now? But the criteria for determining determining how much is too much is whether it is harmful. Does it harm us? If it harms you, then you can say the premium is too much. So if we talk about this fixation on speed, if it interferes with our other priorities in life, our family and all that, maybe it is too high a premium. Or if it can result in mental health issues like anxiety, depression, then maybe it's too much, it's too harmful. Yeah, so you got to look at the harm. If it is not harmful, or if it is indeed beneficial, then you just say it's a lot, but it's not too much. It's actually beneficial to us. So those are the two things you could argue: harmful and beneficial. Now some people say it's excessive, but we come back to the same question. How much is excessive? Okay, you have to actually quantify that by giving it a certain criteria. Okay, the next question is the double-barreled questions. These questions are very common. We see that a lot in A-level. So consider a question like, okay, look at all these questions, right? First of all, how do we identify double-barreled questions? You see words like but, you see words like and. They're pretty easy to spot, and they tend to be a bit longer than other questions. I mean, look at these questions over here. Look at these questions. Like double-barreled questions tend to be a little longer. They are essentially just two questions in one. So look at this one here. Equality of opportunity for females is desirable but unrealistic. There are two questions, one for desirability, one for how realistic it is. So I tend to split them into two questions, A and B. So when I answer, I'm going to have the introduction, then I'd address question A first on desirability, followed by question B on how unrealistic it is. Now when you have a question like this, something but something, the emphasis is always on the second part, okay, the unrealistic part. So let's say I'm going to have 3 paragraphs. I might have 1 paragraph for part A. I'm just going to have an SV. I'm not going to have a counter argument or OV. And then for part B, I'm going to have OV, SV, SV. That's all. So I'm just answering 2 questions in one. If you're not very confident in writing so much, you can just write SV, OV, maybe a rebuttal, OV rebuttal, SV, done, and then a conclusion. So that's how you answer a double-barreled questions. So those are all the tier 1 questions that you're gonna be exposed to right here. Right, these questions are pretty simple. If you see them and they are not tagged together with other difficult questions, I think you should do them, especially if that's one of the topics that you're gonna that you have studied. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about tier 2 questions. If you have any questions, you can just comment below, and remember to subscribe to our channel. This is KP. I'll see you in the next video.